complaints, damp and mould, HHSRS, no heat, hot water. The kind of list goes on of stuff and you think, I've got to do it. If I'll get through it. The sector's wanted to be more customer centric, and I'm wondering, has property become a bit of a second class citizen? Repairs and maintenance is, in every organisation I speak to, the most accessed service. It's got the biggest drivers for customer satisfaction, and it's got the most amount of touch points.
All the same problems still exist today, but has it got harder?
Whether we agree with this or not, I think that customers' expectations have increased. So if I can go on Amazon today and I can order something that's at my front door in the morning, the key question is, why can't my housing provider do that for me? So I do think that adds to the challenge. The other reason I think it's got more complex is,
Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here.
As we always like to start, do you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself and your organisation, if you don't mind?
Of course I will, no problem. So I'm Paul Walker. I'm an exec director at Home Group, and I'm responsible for repairs, maintenance and building safety and health and safety as part of the portfolio. And I've been with the organisation for 7 years and in this role for just over 2.
Nice, perfect, nice and succinct. And you didn't come from a traditional housing background. Just tell the listeners, like, what was your background before housing?
Okay, bit of potted history. So I did 13 years in the energy industry. I worked for npower, and in the latter half of that I was in their energy services division, which had a lot of similarity and I suppose was a grounding for social housing and repairs and maintenance, in that we were doing things like your sort of home care products, a bit like you see British Gas advertising. Left npower back in 2014, 2015, and I went and worked in public transport for 18 months. So for people familiar with the North East, I was on the Tyne and Wear Metro looking after their customer service teams. And then I came to Home Group in the summer of 2017.
Nice. And you say you've been in the exec role 2 years? Is that right?
Yeah, 2 years on the exec team. And prior to that, I was 4.5 years as the director of maintenance. So effectively got promoted into the exec team, but similar sort of area. So been working with the maintenance teams in Home Group since 2019.
Perfect. And just talk us through then, when you went into the role, what were kind of your immediate challenges and priorities? Because it's interesting when we get into the meat of the conversation. I know we're going to talk about the repair service, but what were your priorities and challenges when you first started? I
guess I understood the team and its setup and its ways of working, so I was maybe at an advantage from that respect. But in terms of the challenges, and I guess one of the reasons that our executive decided to have a specific repairs and maintenance team that reported into the CEO was really a common challenge, I think, that Home Group's experience and others, which was around getting to grips with demand, type of demand, and emerging risks around that, and saying, actually, when you look at that, I think we've all got a sort of hockey stick graph where our demand's going up year on year. How do we curtail that demand, but also lower the cost base whilst not compromising service? In fact, quite the opposite. We want to improve the service. You know, it's the right thing for customers, and particularly around consumer standards.
Yeah. And I know we talked a lot about this offline around Home Group, but you've started to think about the collaboration piece. I know you mentioned that with different organisations. Can you talk us a little bit about that and just how that came about? Yeah,
so I'll maybe start, James, if it's all right, with a little bit of background. So when I talk about kind of getting to grips with demand and emerging risk, I'll try and sort of paint a short picture, if you like. So when I joined our repairs team here in Home Group in 2018-19, we completed about 208,000 repairs. That was about 3.8 per property. And around 1 in 5 were an emergency repair. If I look at where we are this year, we're on track to do 275,000 repairs, which is about 5 a property, and 23% of them are emergencies. And if our projections are right, based on the trend we've seen, we reckon 27-28, which is 10 years on from that 18-19 first year, we'll have over 300,000 repairs, about 307,000, about 5.5, 5.6 a property, and 25% emergencies. So we've seen this 50% increase over 10 years and a shift in the profile of that, particularly around the proportion of emergency repairs. So as we've tried to get to grips with that, we've kind of said, well, that's not sustainable for any business, that type of increase in demand. And actually, we can see coming down the line more pressure, particularly around regulation. So whether that's OAB's law, whether it's the Grenfell report, whether it's kind of increase in safety regs. I feel like when I first joined repairs and maintenance, we used to have a few trade-offs. If there was too much demand, But actually now when you look at the workload, you're going complaints, damp and mold, HHSRS, no heat, hot water. The kind of list goes on of stuff and you think, I've got to do it. I've got to get through it. And of course, there's not just a rising cost of meeting an increase in demand, but the specific parts of that cost have took a hit. So whether that's your labour rates, your supply chain, only last week we saw the Chancellor's budget and you've got the NI increase, all these things got to deal with. So as we were analysing it, and if you think about it really, what we do is logistics. So there are some commonality between what we do and other sectors. You've just got to get people the right place with the right bits and pieces to get the best value. So as we've looked at that, we were thinking about, well, what are the things that we can do in terms of driving an efficient service? And there's clearly something around access to the right resource, how productive that resource is, how effective that resource is in terms of its outcomes, so from diagnostic through to right first time. But there's only so much we can do as an individual, so it's really got me thinking about, there are a few things that I think I need to do, and I think my peer group and others in the sector need to do, that are absolutely common sense in terms of problem solving. So the first one or two are around systems and data, so whether that's one thing or two things, system data. But having visibility of everything, knowing where it is, who's doing it, being able to track it, produce that audit trail, really important. But then beyond that critical mass and density to get your productivity up and your jobs per day up is absolutely key. And when I sit at home in my home office, or when I'm sat here today in Durham and I look out the window and I see the carbon van go one way and the Benicia van go the other way, and there's 20 vans in our car park because we're doing a toolbox talk, and we're turning up in the same estates, you kind of think, this is nuts. So I think there's something about how we look. We often look at geography, density, asset, through asset in terms of our portfolio and property. But I think we need to drop that down to service level and see who can we work with to help with a platform that allows us to integrate and work with one another. And then beyond that, how can we share our resources and leverage our collective capability to really drive up that productivity? Because it seems pointless going to the parts supplier and going into their car park and seeing 4 vans with 4 different logos on, and 4, ladies or gents chatting about the day they've got ahead, and then they all drive off, maybe a bit like the Red Arrows, or maybe even on the same estate to do the same type of work. It just feels like we're in a bit of a muddle and we could do better.
Right. And just give us some context, maybe for the listeners, because that's a lot of repairs. I mean, I was gobsmacked when you said how many repairs you do in a year. But what's that against properties-wise? Like 60, 70,000? What have Home Group got now?
We've got 55,000 properties. Okay. So when I did those kind of repairs to property, like I say, at the minute this year we're sort of 4.5, which is not massively out of sync. But I do think that part of the increase that we are seeing in terms of repairs per property and total repairs is shared in the sector. And actually, I think as a sector, one of the problems we have to face up to is, I think in the past few years, the sector's wanted to be more customer centric, invested a huge more in housing management and frontline. And I'm wondering, has property become a bit of a second-class citizen? But what's really interesting is repairs and maintenance is, in every organisation I speak to, the most accessed service. It's got the biggest drivers for customer satisfaction, the biggest proportion of complaints listed against it, and it's got the most amount of touch points. So again, in terms of that efficiency piece, there's not just how do we leverage the people who've got tools and are in properties, fixing stuff and doing stuff, but actually how do we leverage our capacity as organisations in terms of that housing management and probably more estate management. So I'm not sure you build good relationships with customers, but again, if you drive through some Home Group houses to get to a different provider's home, actually, why aren't we looking out for, you do know that one's covered in green moss and it's going to have damp and mould. I could flag that, I just need to press a button. Google get us to do it, don't they? You Google a business and it says, is this your business? Is the information right? You press a few buttons and you give them a bit of feedback. Again, how do we do that as a sector? How do we help each other?
Yeah. And what's the nirvana position? Because from my opinion, I've been in the sector 15, 16 years, and it's been the same issue 15 years, in my opinion. Productivity per resource. It's been around logistical challenges around van stock, vans. All the same problems still exist today. But has it got harder because of all of the different regulations and all of the different types of problems we have in properties now? Or is it just the challenges just moved on and evolved over time?
That's an interesting question. I'll give you my sort of gut reaction to that. So I think it has got more difficult for a couple of key reasons. So the first is, whether we agree with this or not, I think that customers' expectations have increased.
100%. Yeah.
So if I can go on Amazon today and I can order something that's at my front door in the morning, the key question is, why can't my housing provider do that for me? So I do think that adds to the challenge. The other reason I think it's got more complex is we're seeing a trend in the sector where people are moving back to DLOs. Home group is no different. We are doing exactly the same. But one of the challenges that we are trying to overcome through doing that is we all entered probably back in kind of the early 2010s, 2012. Big PPP style contracts with large R&M providers. And what those contracts do is they pay for a provision of service. So we say, we're going to give you this many jobs, and they say, well, in return, we think you'll need 30 people. And that's never really moved on. They don't have a lot of flexibility in them. So you can be paying for a contract that has a provision to handle 1 million jobs a year, and you bought that in 2012. And if your numbers have moved like ours have, you're now putting the pressure on the contractor to deliver 1.5 million. And I think as a sector, with our sort of, ethics, we don't expect, or I certainly don't expect, that third parties will subsidise the organisation and its customers. So part of what I think we're trying to solve is a problem that was probably building up for a little while, which is we haven't been adjusting the resource we are paying for and the capacity we're paying for to truly reflect that demand. And now we're trying to get on top of that snowball and the momentum that's behind it.
Fine. And the more repairs per property, because the more people I speak to in repairs, every organisation is doing more repairs per property than they were 10 years ago. Is that because of expectation, or is that because the quality of our homes has decreased and aged more over the years? I'm trying to understand, why are we doing more repairs, and why have we not? Is there a way of fixing some of those things at source through planned works or whatever to stop having to go out for certain remedial repairs? I'm trying to understand whether or not we're going to end up in a place where we speak in 10 years and you say we're doing 7 repairs per property.
Why do I think that is? I think it's a combination of probably 3 things, in all honesty. So I think in terms of customer expectation, I think COVID had an impact on what customers expect. Not necessarily in terms of our response times or standards of service, but actually also in terms of how they view and use their property. So I'm in my house a lot more than I was pre-2019. And I'm like everybody else out there. I've got a list of jobs that I'm asked to do at home, and I haven't quite got through them. Now, I think you see those things more and you realise them more when you're in the house. And I think, therefore, the phone rings for things that perhaps customers in the past either didn't ring for or could see past. The media, I think the scrutiny, rightly on things like damp and mould, quality of property, I think people go, oh, I should ring up about that. And perhaps we didn't know about it. And then the final thing is definitely asset investment, for sure. I think as a sector, when we've been under financial pressure, we've maybe turned down the planned programme or looked at it. And that's caused a problem for sure. And in Home Group, we're doing a huge amount of work around our asset management strategy to try and get the balance of that right. And interestingly, there is no benchmarking in terms of what proportion of work money should be spent on planned versus repairs. So like everybody else, we're trying to work that out.
Yeah, okay. And I want to go back to the collaboration approach, because I do think that I love the Northeast, actually. Like, when I look at the housing sector, I think one of the parts of the sector that do this really well is the Northeast. I actually do think it's a little bit more close-knit. The density's better. So actually there's loads of reasons why you would collaborate. But what have been some of the challenges when you've been trying to propose the collaboration approach? Like, what have been some of the issues that you've faced potentially?
I think there are 2 that stand out. The first is, if we do this, have we got the infrastructure to allow us to do it? And at the moment, that's quite challenging. But with disruptors in the market like Plentific, with solutions coming along like Dynamics and Salesforce, I think the platform and the tech we would need to do it is getting easier and is emerging for sure, and it's most certainly in development. I'm talking to people about that. The second then is an interesting challenge. So this is how it goes. You pick up the phone, you say, it's Paul at Home Group. You've got 5,000 properties down there, I've got 500. Would you like to look after mine? Or I get a phone call and they go, Paul, I've got 5,000 over here, you've got 20,000, can you look after mine? And everybody goes, I would absolutely love to, but I haven't got the capacity to meet my own demand. So I think there is absolutely a willingness to explore it and get behind it. Conceptually, I think everybody agrees it makes sense. Why would you
100%.
send someone to number one, me to number two, you to number three? But then there's a bit about, but actually I've got a bit of a backlog myself, or I'm trying to just keep my head above water. And therefore, what do we do to be brave and overcome that nervousness? Because interestingly, often, if I look at the Northeast, that backlog or that sort of ability to keep your head just above water comes as a result of having some vacancies. And you're trying to fill 5 vacancies for joiners that the person sat next to you, in effect, is trying to fill, and the person sat next to them is trying to fill. But again, do we all need 5, and do we need 15 in total? Or actually, between us, do we need 10 because we can tackle some stuff geographically? So I think there's a bit about how we think about our resources, but also the resource planning, as well as the resource deployment and how we use that capacity.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the collaboration, but you've mentioned it, so I want to just pick up on it. The trades problem is deepening daily, right? So there's 2 ways to fix that. Create more qualified tradespeople that we can use, or create more efficiencies so we don't need as many to deliver our services. How has Home Group fared with the ability to attract the right amount of tradespeople for your need? Because, I mean, I'm going 275,000 to 300,000 repairs. That's a lot of tradespeople that are needed, whether that be through yourself or your supply chain. It's a lot of people requirement that. So how have you found that, and what more can we do as a sector to, create more, generate more apprentices, all that sort of stuff? Have you thought anything about that as a business?
So how have we found it challenging? That challenge, James, varies geographically. So we've got properties as far north as Dundee. We've got them right along the south coast. So those 55,000 are across England and Scotland. We get a bit more success in the northeast. We find it very challenging in the southeast, as do our contracting partners. So in terms of overcoming that, we are, I guess, trying to be attractive as an employer. But what we're not wanting to do, nor have we got the capacity to do this, is just increase salary. So what we're trying to do is work with others. So we're in a Northeast forum where we're talking about, well, actually, what is a gas engineer worth? A good gas engineer should be worth X amount of pounds, and that's what we should. So we're trying to keep the market fair. But in terms of attracting new people, I think through social value historically in contracts, we need to apply some of the same principles of social value, particularly around employment, resources, through DLOs. So we've kept a provision for that, and we've got a number of apprentices in our team. We'd love to do more, but again, the challenge is you slow down the experience, because actually they're taking some of that capacity to invest in somebody else, which is right. But you've got to kind of slow down to speed up. So we're grappling with what's the optimum number of apprentices to kind of grow that future resource, but also be able to keep the wheels turning day to day for our customers.
Yeah, okay. And just going back to the collaboration, and I agree on the trades point, but I am seeing it way more prevalent now that people are struggling to be able to deliver their work based on skills alone. It used to be a combination of skills, logistics, systems, technology, all the things. It feels like skills is becoming a real debilitator in terms of being able to deliver services that we need. And I don't know where the answer is, but certainly something we should collectively as a sector try and fix, rather than each organisation go off and do their own thing. But just on the collaborative approach to repairs, if we go back to that, what's been some of the successes you've had so far proposing that? What's been some of the appetite and some of the successes you've seen?
I think in terms of appetite, that's been successful. So the conversation that we are having today and the things I'm talking about, I've talked to a number of people in the sector about, and I think there's kind of willingness and momentum behind the discussion to work out, is this something we can do and how do we do it? That's great. In terms of in Home Group, we've done a couple of things where we've looked at our repairs model, certainly where we've either lacked density or we've lacked knowledge, because we're a Northeast based association. We've got 90 years experience up here. We haven't got that elsewhere. So we have got a model in the southwest corner of Scotland, in Dumfries and Galloway, where we're in a partnership, and DGHP undertake repairs for our customers. They've got 10,000 homes, we've got 500. So again, it makes perfect sense. It plays with the principles I've talked about. We've tried a wholly owned subsidiary where we've been in partnership with a contractor to act as a kind of tripartite agreement between Home Group, the parent, a wholly owned subsidiary, and that organisation, to say, well, actually, if you're set up in the area and you've got the supply chain and the logistics and the planning knowledge, and we think we can bring good people with our culture, understand our customers and our systems and data, How do we bash those two things together to deliver a better service? That's been an interesting test for us. Not always been successful, these things, but good sort of learning in terms of that. And then, like I say, beyond that, it's the ongoing conversation with other RSLs and other peers in the sector to work out how we might do something RSL to RSL rather than kind of thinking about other contractors that sit around it and is there a different model with them? Because I think, interestingly, if we could get our resources working more efficiently across the sector, when it then comes to what do you need in your supply chain and partnerships, then actually, if Amazon can deliver parts on a sort of just-in-time model and they can do your fulfillment, why would you have people traditionally going to a merchant for that stuff if you can get it delivered to customers' properties? So it starts to kind of almost break up the supply chain a little bit or disconnect it. But I think that's fine because what you want to do is play to people's knowledge, skills, and expertise across that. So is it Checker Trade? Is it Uber's model? Is it Amazon? Is it a combination of them all? But again, we're trying to break into conversations with those types of organisations to say, what can you do for me upstream so that if I've got a decent resource model and I can get it where it needs to be, you can make sure that when they get there, they've got what they need.
I really like that. And I do think we can learn from other sectors. And it was a question for later, but I'll ask you now just because it's relevant. It's like, does any of this, because you're obviously striving for a much better situation for your organisation, but what I love is you're also striving for a better position for the sector. But is there anything you've learned from some of your previous experience that have shaped what Home Group do in their repair service, or why your brain seems to go to this innovative, collaborative approach?
So I tell you the other thing I've learned, I've sort of been reflecting on in terms of previous experience. One thing I loved when I was in public transport was sitting in the control room. So if anybody's ever had the opportunity to be in a control room, they're fascinating. So you can see a whole network of stuff that's going on a huge wall with lots of screens. And what they effectively do is help you manage things in jeopardy. So a train's broke down, a customer's poorly on a platform, there's a junction box broke, whatever it might be. And what I've been thinking about in terms of driving out waste and driving efficiencies for Home Group is how do we create that sort of control room and jeopardy environment? So I'll bet again, a common thing that we hear in the sector and I hear is, well, data is not very good, might not be perfect, but what I don't hear and what I think is certainly true in Home Group is we've got loads of data, that much to the point where I don't think we know what to do with it. So I've been thinking about in terms of our internal operating model, and again, if you could collaborate and do this, is how do we almost replicate a control room that says, right, I want a system to tell me when the following 10 things happen. So that might be, this phone number's tried to ring you 4 times in the past hour and no one's answered. Give them a ring and check they're okay. Or this customer's had 2 cancelled jobs in the past 48 hours. Give them a ring and check they're okay. So how do we use our data to anticipate customer failure and create a small control room where we can handle that, manage the customer and their expectations, and hold the delivery model to account? And that delivery model might be, a combination of, well, we've got 4 DLOs working in Sunderland, so therefore we can talk to all 4, whatever that might be. So I always think when you go to London and you go on the Underground, it says, I don't know, the Victoria Line's got a good service, the Piccadilly's got a few hiccups. How do we say, actually, the service in Sunderland's going well? Service in Durham, there's been a few delays because of emergency jobs. And then how do we, as a back office, process that information, manage customer expectations, and drive the service forward, whether that's through a contract or a DLO or something that's not as traditional as either of those things.
I love that. And how close to that could we be? Like, is the technology there for us to have that dashboard, that control centre, for you to have this all singing, all dancing thing that gives you some of the levers you'd need to pull to improve the service? Or are we nowhere near? I mean, I've no idea. I don't work in the sector specifically, but what I'm understanding is how far would we be to get to that position?
Maybe on this, I'm speaking particularly from a Home Group perspective. We're probably somewhere in between nowhere near and it could be straightforward in that the data exists. I think our challenge in our organisation, which I dare say is probably common, depending on what your CRM is a bit about how do you extract that on a regular cyclical basis. There's then a bit about how you deal with it. But the other thing is, I'm sure as people are thinking about their demand and how they're going to deal with that, the phrase I use is like a release valve or that surge capacity. And where we identify surge capacity, we often aren't interfaced with a small subcontractor who can pick up 50 jobs. So actually you lose sight of a bit of stuff. So one of the things I think we need to do when a platform's there for us to all play on the same part, if you like, is make sure that we are able to interface all of our jobs. Because once you understand everything, that is so much easier to do rather than trying to do it with 80% and then have people scrambling about on the other 20% where they're phoning every morning to go, how are you getting on with row 2 on that spreadsheet, and have you done their fence repair, whatever it might be.
Really interesting. Like the way you think about it's really, really interesting. Like I've never actually thought that deeply about it, but actually you can start to see where this could end up, which is quite exciting for the sector, I think. And certainly we've seen other sectors. You mentioned Uber, you mentioned Checkatrade. We've seen that we have innovated these areas quite well recently, so it can be done. It can be done. I'm sure 10 years ago, no one thought that taxis would be self-employed and that there would be a central flat platform for them to be able to get jobs. So it's there somewhere, the technology. You mentioned just briefly about DLOs, but we're seeing an increase and a decrease. So we're seeing an increase in DLOs, but I'm seeing a cyclical nature, having been in the sector long enough to see it now, where we go in-house, we go out, we outsource, we insource, we outsource, we insource. What I am seeing and what I'd like to understand from your perspective is like, what needs to be done with DLOs, in your opinion, to tackle some of the challenges that they face? Because there are a lot of challenges, and sometimes the easiest thing is to put it to an outsource provider. Doesn't necessarily increase the quality and increase what the customer experiences. But what's your view on DLOs, and what's your view on what needs to be done so they can tackle the repairs challenge more effectively?
So the in-source and outsourcing thing and the hokey-cokey is interesting, isn't it? And what I always think is whenever you do something like that, no matter which way you go, it tends to increase your cost before you feel the benefit. So where we are at, and where I think, again, as a sector, we should think is, I'm now testing and pushing my team on, when you say you've got a DLO, tell me exactly what you mean. Because here in the Northeast, we would say we've got a DLO and we've got a good workforce who do lots of stuff, but they're not doing lift repairs, they're not doing grounds maintenance, they're not doing communal cleaning, they're not doing plan works. So what I would like to see, and what I think the sector could think about, is an idea of a DLO maturity model, which I think could drive efficiencies and also help meeting some of those peaks and troughs in demand. So let me give you a couple of examples. What if we all insourced our communal cleaning, gave all of those colleagues a van from the fleet, and gave them all a handheld device? And every morning they turn on that handheld device, and guess what? Every Monday it says go here, because they're on like a milk round, a paper round. But then when the phone rings off the hook for damp and mould, we know 99% of those cases tend to be a conversation with a customer, a mould wash, some treatment, and in the sort of 1% exception, it might lead to a technical survey. So why can't I deploy that cleaning resource? Because at the minute, we end up doing that through, more expensive people, respectively, like a wet plumber. So there's a bit about how do we optimize our DLOs to suppress the rise in cost and meeting that demand. So another thought might be, well, actually, if I brought in 50% of my void work, can I stand some voids down if we've had a storm and I need to go and make 500 fences secure because Storm Arwen's ripped through the northeast storm? So I think, again, that DLO maturity, James, for me, when people say I've got a DLO, I always say, tell me what that really means. So what proportion of work are you truly doing? Because I think you're probably doing routine repairs, 90%. You might be doing some emergencies. You may be doing some gas and electric checks, and you might be fitting the odd kitchen. But actually, if you think about every piece of work we have to do as a business, I think we should think about insourcing more to optimize it, not just focus on that responsive repairs work stream specifically.
That's a really, really good way of looking at it. Yeah, I've never even thought of it that way. We just always think of repairs and think your day-to-day joinery, plumbing, but there's so much variety, isn't there? Okay, we're nearly out of time, but I had one last question, if you don't mind. So you clearly like thinking out the box. I've said this a few times already today, and I can see that your brain goes to the solution and the innovation straight away. But what other ideas are on the horizon for Home Group that you are trying to innovate or you are trying to think outside the box on? And we can finish it there, because that's a nice way to end.
Yeah, I don't think much more I've said, to be honest. I think the kind of 4 or 5 things. There's the sector collaboration, which we talked a lot about, that data and jeopardy management. So how do we all use our understanding of what we've got today better to anticipate customer failure, to better manage expectations? DLO maturity is really big for me at the moment in terms of leveraging that opportunity to bring more stuff in actually, and then get greater efficiencies from it. Amazon, Uber, that technology, like I said earlier, well, logistics at the end of the day, Amazon started by putting books in boxes, and now look where they're at in terms of their whole kind of supply chain. And then the idea of the control room, being able to understand service, hold it to account. You know, I bet we've all got customer service and call centers that handle customer contact and are then triaging and moving work around the business. But actually, who's got that eye on, the day of the race? What's happening today? Have we got the right capacity? Have we got people in the right place? If we need to drop jobs, are we choosing the right things or the wrong things? Who's got an eye on the customer vulnerability markers, etc.? So joining up that kind of service and the sort of planning and scheduling functions, really important.
Amazing. And what a great segue to finish. I think the one thing I would say is like, I've loved to listen to someone with a totally different view on repairs that I've heard before. I think it's nice that like you're starting to try and collaborate with the sector. If people do want to reach out to you, can they find you on LinkedIn? Can they drop you an email? Are we happy to put that in the show notes? Because I think there'll be people really interested by the content of this conversation. But a massive thank you from me for coming on the HIP podcast, and thank you very much for sharing your insights into repairs, Paul.
You're really welcome. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and anybody's welcome to reach out. I am on LinkedIn, and by all means share my contact details.
Will do. Cheers, Paul. Thank you for listening to another episode of The HIP. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.